Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Breakthrough Innovation. I'm JL Heather, and with us today is my co-host Preston Chandler and our guest, Dylan Casey. Dylan's the Chief Product Officer at Wisecode. He's also a former Google and Yahoo product leader and a co-founder, entrepreneur, and investor. If that's not enough, Dylan's career journey is anything but typical because he also started out as an Olympic professional cyclist, which I can't even imagine. I don't know that I could ride even an hour at this point in my life. But before transitioning into technology leadership, where he's driven groundbreaking product innovation across multiple industries. So in this episode, we're going to explore a few things. First, the reality of innovation, why innovation isn't a democracy and doesn't happen on data alone. We're going to talk about how we build and scale products, how to balance creativity, analytics, and execution to drive product success. And lastly, human optimization and decision-making, what endurance sports, leadership, and venture investing teaches us about making bold decisions and driving impact. So if you're interested in product strategy, leadership, and redefining innovation, you're in the right place. Dylan, I'm really excited to have this conversation, and we're really glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So I think the place to dive in here is with the Olympic cyclist. I have to admit, I'm incredibly curious about that experience and how it shaped your approach to leadership as you moved into tech.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit late to the sport of cycling relative to, my peers, whether at the professional level or at the Olympic level. But, it was really, I discovered it while I was going to college, and, I was planning to take the traditional path of graduating and getting a job and, you know, going down that path. And I think about 6 months into an internship that I had after I graduated, I just realized if I don't chase after this, dream, I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. So I said, I have to go all in on this. So I did. And I think I accomplished more than I ever imagined. And I definitely exceeded everyone else's expectations, including my own. And, I think, what most people don't know about cycling as a sport is that, you don't go to like practice every day with your teammates, or you don't go to, a training facility and there's a coach, telling you what to do. You're really driving your own ship, so to speak. And I think, that experience and that process is really one of the places I learned the true art form of prioritization, like getting really clear about how you're going to spend your time. And, the reality is that 24/7, you're prioritizing every decision for, a specific outcome or to achieve a specific objective. And I think, there was a point in time where I kind of mapped out what I wanted my career to be, and I was thinking about it kind of in 1 year increments because, you think about a season of the year. And, I remember this one very specific example where I was at a race in Pennsylvania, Altoona, and the next big race was the following weekend in Seattle. And I was an amateur, really. I didn't have an income. I was literally living off of prize money. And it was the night before the last race, and I needed to come up with enough money to buy a plane ticket to get to Seattle. So I went and looked at prize list breakdown of the finish order of the next day. And I basically figured out, okay, I need like $350 to buy a ticket. And that means, based on the prize list schedule, that I need to get third place or better. So I didn't get second place. So I had enough money to buy the ticket, but it was just this absolute clarity around focus and it was kind of like, it was just something, it was the framework and the mindset that I had, that I applied to the sport. And then, what most people don't understand about the Olympics too, and I didn't understand this at the time, or I didn't understand how this would be applicable to, the career that I've had in the tech industry. But the Olympics is a very, very like political slash machine, so to speak. So at the International Olympic Committee and then the United States Olympic Committee level, each country is allocated a certain number of spots. And then the country basically is doing this like calculation and running models and has spreadsheets about, which sports are they going to allocate the most resources to, where they think they can get a gold medal, because ultimately that's the primary objective. Because at the end of the day, these are all platforms for advertising. Without gold medals, you don't get advertisers. And it's like,
Right.
I'm interviewing for a job at Google, and Google is basically a platform that is, designed to generate engagement so that you could sell ads. I'm like, oh, I know this game. You know what I mean? So it was like the same exact game, same philosophy from a business perspective. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but a lot of the lessons that I was learning as an athlete and learning how to kind of navigate the system in order to achieve my own objectives was really exposing to me how a lot of other things work. So it was an interesting experience that at the time I didn't realize was going to be so valuable later on in life.
Yeah, and I love, like, what I hear you talking about is not only the ability to prioritize, but the ability to have a really concrete definition of success, right? And also understanding that your definition of personal success won't always match an organization's definition of success. And the important part is to find a way to align them so they can work together.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember, before OKRs were a thing that I learned about at Google, the way that I looked at my season when I was an athlete, the first thing I realized is that my goal wasn't to win races. My goal was to get paid to do something I love, and winning the races was the thing that was going to get me to get paid. So I kind of understood this like whole function and structure of OKRs, because then I was like, okay, I need to win some races this year to achieve my objective. Now, which races do I think I can win? Okay, let's look at the calendar. When are those? And then how do I organize and design my training program so that I show up on those days, ready to win the race? And I'm like, oh, that's actually what you call a roadmap.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's funny because now, I basically think about roadmaps and prioritization and objectives the same exact way. It's so simple. It's basic. And I think like when you can help people and teams kind of look at it through that framework or look at it through that lens, it's kind of an unlock, right? Because I think people get stuck in this whole they read the book about how to write OKRs, and all of a sudden you get this 30-page document. You're like, no. It's a couple bullet points.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
No, I love what you're saying. I think you create something simple that people can relate to that helps them connect to the things that are a little bit more complex.
totally. Yeah. And it's funny, I walked into Yahoo. I rejoined Marissa Mayer, who I had worked for most of my career at Google. And I inherited this platform organization. And, the first thing that I was being told is like, I needed to fire everybody and rehire. I was like, well, hold on. Before we do that, like, let's just like make sure we've got some basic building blocks in place, which means, do they understand what they're supposed to do? Like, do they have clarity on like, why it matters and what problems they're trying to solve? And then like, do they know, is there like a good feedback loop that they can tap into to get understanding about whether or not they're doing what they're doing? None of that existed. And so it was just like going and like, we had this mission statement for the team that was like a paragraph long, kind of like consultant type mission statement. And I was like, no, one sentence, and like, go back to the basics, get paid to do what I love. And how many races do I need to win? And it kind of like, it still worked, it was totally applicable in that scenario.
No, I love it. I think thinking through this, something else you've said is innovation isn't a democracy. In the way you're talking about, I can kind of see some of that, right? There have to be points where someone is making a decision. But when you say innovation is a democracy, as we talked about a little bit earlier, like that inspires a lot of reactions in me. And I think I know what you mean, but I'm curious from your perspective, like, how do you describe that? Like, innovation, not a democracy. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think I've used that, as a principle, and I generally apply it in situations where, there's a dynamic that exists that potentially creates a scenario where everybody's optimizing for consensus, right? And I think the downfall of that is that you might be making everybody around you happy, but you're not actually delivering, value to your customer or your user in such a way that you're actually going to be, accomplishing what you set out to do. And I think at the end of the day, like when you're being ruthless about prioritization and also ruthless about how you're allocating your resources, if you're not clear on, what you're doing, then you're going to fail on all those other things. And I think, innovation is kind of a mindset. I mean, we talk about it in lots of different ways, and we apply it in different ways, and it depends on the industry. Of course, there's big innovation, which is like, let's go to Mars. And then there's little innovation, which is like, hey, maybe we should rethink how we're doing this. Maybe we should challenge the status quo. Maybe the best practices actually don't apply here, or they're not actually going to get us a breakthrough that we need.
So this just brings to my mind something that JL and I often talk about. Decisions by committee don't usually work. And so that on the one hand, you have decisions by committee don't work. But then we often talk about democratizing something. And I think we can't get those two confused. We want to democratize or make everybody able to go and do some innovation. But totally agree with you, Dylan, that you have to have a singular vision. You can't afford decisions by committee.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't matter
participating.
It doesn't matter how many people vote that 1 + 1 = 3. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it true. And I think to some extent what we're saying here is democratization is another way of saying you have to empower the teams, right? You have to empower the people closest to the problem to solve that problem within the context of the vision.
Yeah. And look, I think like I said, the way that I've used it as a principle has given me the flexibility to apply it in a contextually relevant way, right? Because, for example, there have been times in my career where as a team, we've all bought into a vision and a decision. And, from there, we went to, meet with kind of our stakeholders or the people that we needed to actually buy in and approve. And we ultimately came out with a different decision. And, the democratic part of the process that I used in that particular scenario is I went back to the team and I said, hey, look, we actually are going to go in a different direction. And even though that's not what we all agreed on, you're all part of the process because here's what happened. Here was the discussion. Here was the decision. Here's why we're making this pivot or this change. And so you may or not agree, or you may not have been part of that process, but you're at least involved in such a way that you can ultimately take ownership of it moving forward. And then I think the other scenario that exists where democracy is not an innovation, like it's almost a mandate, is when, you can't make everybody happy. You can't solve every edge case.
Agreed.
You in some ways, you have to be comfortable with a little bit of collateral damage, right? Because oftentimes when you're innovating, you're breaking glass and you're doing things that are going to have adverse effects. And you're basically saying, I'm willing to accept those adverse effects, as a trade-off for the, net positive gain of this decision or this, or how we're going to innovate or allocate our resources. And so in those scenarios, it's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm making this decision.
Right.
And there's been many times where I've had to actually, stand up in a room and say, you know what? No, I disagree with all of you. This thing is ready to launch. We're going to launch it tomorrow. And I'm making this decision. And if it breaks or it's wrong or it's catastrophic, you can all hold me accountable.
Yeah.
Like I will fall on the sword.
We run design sprints with organizations. And one of the things, every design sprint has a person in it that is the decider. And we spend a lot of time up front working with that decider to help them get to a point where they can actually disagree with the room, because that's important. You will find oftentimes when we do dot voting and things that are about consensus building, the most important thing that can happen there is to have someone who is a little bit outside the voting that can go, all right, I've heard everything. I've seen everything. I've looked at the data and I have this experience. Based on all of that, we're going with this option. Even though it was ranked second or third, this is the right option to try right now for all these reasons. But understand, I've heard everyone and I appreciate everyone's input. I mean, that takes a certain level of bravery, courage, you name it, to be able to do well without turning people off.
There are times that I have been wrong, right? And I've made the decision, but it actually had a net positive effect because the team was able to actually point out, no, here's why you're wrong. Okay, we had this fumble or we made a mistake or whatever, but now let's try this. And I've been very open to that. And I think sometimes when you have when you take a hard position, the at least in my scenario, there's nothing I love more than when there's a PM on the team or an engineer on the team or a designer on the team who's like, no, Dylan, I'm willing to stand over the railroad tracks and tell you why you're wrong.
Right.
And like, and then wants to do the work, wants to show me, that they spent the time to do the analysis or to come up with an alternative, or they're like, oh, wait a minute. I can remember the best experience I had with an engineer once is we were having breakfast and we were like jamming on a product idea. Later that day, she came back to me and she said, I was thinking about our chat this morning. I ripped together a quick demo and here's 10 things you totally didn't think about. And I was like, oh,
yes,
right. You're totally right.
So, but Dylan, I think that just shows that you're one of the rare leaders who can balance the decision-making and the empowerment. Too often we see decision makers who think, I'm going to make every decision and no one can disagree with me.
Right.
And without realizing, no, there has to be that balance. We have to make a decision, but we can't afford to shut down people's thinking.
Yeah.
Or even worse, they say, I'm going to make every decision. And if it doesn't work, it's your fault. If it does work, it's my credit.
See that?
Yeah.
Dylan, we're getting close to the end on time here. And there's a question you wanted to be asked that I enjoy way too much not to ask. So here we go. If you were a professional criminal, what would be your crime of choice and why?
It's the Ocean's 11. It's the beat heist, because, and by the way, this is one of my favorite interview questions to ask. And there's no right answer. I just want to know how people think. Right. And you also get a good insight into kind of like, where they get energy. But like for me, that the idea of that much planning, and not only that, but inevitably something will go wrong in your plan. And the key to being successful is how you deal with that moment, right? And I think that's, kind of going back to something we were chatting about earlier, like one of the most valuable kind of attributes and lessons that I learned as an athlete was like, winning and losing comes down to how well you deal with the setbacks. Like I used to have this saying, it's easy to be good. Like every day when you're winning, you're on top. Everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to interview you. But when you suck, nobody wants to talk to you. No one wants to give you time of day or energy or anything. And that's when you really have to pull it together. And so I just love that, that idea that you're under incredible amounts of pressure, right? Obviously, if things go wrong, the outcome's going to be really bad for you if you're trying to pull off a heist. And it takes an immense amount of planning and you have to have an extreme amount of empathy. It's almost another good answer that I heard was somebody, they wanted to design phishing attacks, right? And I thought that, I'm like, oh, that's clever, because in order to design a really good phishing attack, you have to have an amazing empathy for how the, person you're trying to phish is going to react emotionally to every step of the, of the attack, so to speak. So I don't know. That's
an amazing ability not to care about those feelings.
Well, that's true. I mean, you have somebody that's like hyper focused on execution. So, lack of moral.
And the last thing, Dylan, any parting thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's redundant at this point, but man, I hope everybody's really leaning into all the innovation that's happening right now around large language models and AI. I think that, everybody should be using these tools. Force yourself to do it, use them in ways that you haven't even thought about. I was trying to figure out how to fix something on my swimming pool the other day. And of course I went to ChatGPT. And so, just don't be scared of these things, because this is an amazing time. It's an amazing time to be alive. And there's lots of uncertainty and chaos in the world, but I think there's also just tons of opportunity. And I don't know, I'm just really optimistic about everything.
So Dylan, before we leave, what's the best way for people to collaborate and contact with you?
I'm on LinkedIn and also at Dylan Casey on Twitter/X. So I'm pretty easy to get in touch with.
Awesome. Love it. Dylan, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I loved every minute of it. Highly entertaining. For everyone else who's made it all the way to the end with us, definitely hit that like button, leave us a review, let us know how this went. If you know someone who's interested in cycling, who has some thoughts on innovation as a democracy, you name it, introduce them to Dylan, introduce them to this episode, and share the value. And then lastly, revisit the episode a little bit, take an actionable insight, apply it, and let us know how it goes, because we love to hear about your own improvement. So that said, Dylan, thank you again. Everyone else, thank you. And we'll see you next time on Breakthrough Innovation.